What's up, Wildside besties and baddies? I'm Bailey.
And I'm Chelsea, and we're here to walk you through the wild sides.
From homicides to hosticides and everything in between.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride.
We're back. Here we are.
We are back at it again.
Doodly doodly doo.
So this week, you guys, I think you're going to really like this case because Chelsea, guess what week it is? It's interview week. It is interview week. Do you remember with whom? Is it with Mark? It is with Mark. Yes. And so you guys, the interview this week is going to be with none other than Mark Safarik, who is a very, very well-known and world-renowned FBI profiler.
Yes. And so this is technically our third profiler that we've had the pleasure of speaking with. And Mark has just a different interview style, if you will. He is less storytelling, more informative, which is also cool. So I feel like both of the interviews that we've had, both with Fitz and Dr. Ray, and then also with Mark, like I said, they've both been amazing and totally different in their own way, and just a gob of information, dollop of information.
Yeah. And this interview with Mark is going to be a little bit different because the interview we did with Ray and Jim, it was more just them kind of sharing their personal anecdotal perspectives and experience working for the Bureau. But with Mark, what you guys are going to get this week is a rundown of criminal profiling, like what it actually means, what it looks like, what the process is behind criminal profiling. So kind of cutting into criminal minds and looking at that from a real profiler.
Yes. And it's so cool to hear people using jargon in their specific field. I love that he just so effortlessly talks about things like staging, and that was just really cool.
Yeah. And so for this week, I think the best way to honor Mark and the work that he's done is I actually found a case that Mark literally had a hand in solving. Pretty much he literally solved because of criminal profiling. So it was actually technically considered a cold case for several years until the local authorities brought in Mark Safarik as a consultant, and his expertise, his profiling is what solved the case after several years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Ooh, and those are my favorite types. I really hate, obviously, any sort of unsolved or cold cases. So that's exciting to hear how he was able to put his expertise in action. Boots on the ground.
Boots on the ground. And so this case is actually off of one of the episodes, and you'll hear it in our interview with Mark, that he was a consultant, a producer for a TV series called Killer Instinct. And all of the episodes are actual real life cases that he worked on, that he was involved in, and that he helped solve. And so I just kind of went through and picked the one that had not really been covered a whole lot and went with that one.
Nice.
Yeah. So are you ready for this deep dive into the criminal profiling case?
I am.
And this, you guys, is the case of Lisa Ann Dahm.
Dahm?
Dahm. Like D-A-H-M.
Dahm.
Yeah. And so we're going to start at the very beginning with a background about Lisa, and then we're going to jump right in. So Lisa Ann Dahm was born on June 28th, 1971 in San Diego, California. And she was born to Frank and Donna Dahm, and she had a sister, Shannon. Okay. Lisa and Shannon grew up as what many would consider them to be military brats. Their father, Frank, was in the Army, and the family moved around a whole lot from military base to military base, right? Because that's kind of the nature of it. Because of the consistent uprooting and moving around, the Dahms were a super close-knit family.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa was described as a vivacious, feisty, and loyal individual. And they said, like, her friends and family said she was loyal almost to a fault.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably going to play into this episode.
Oh.
She was described by a boyfriend as being an amazing woman and that she was tough on the outside, but she was a teddy bear with a huge heart.
Is this case about you? Is this actually the case of Bailey?
Well, her birthday is June 28th.
I noticed that. I did pick up on it. Maybe it's like an astrology Cancer thing.
Yeah, well, I'm a Cancer and she's a Cancer.
That's what I mean. Like,
so
y'all are both little
sappy saplings.
that little sappy with a hard shell.
That's right.
I think that's like M&Ms. Isn't that why they were produced? So they melt in your mouth, not in your hand. They have like the hard candy shell, maybe, so the military guys could carry them around and wouldn't get all over the place.
I don't know. Is that a real thing?
I think so. Yeah, it's a thing.
Okay.
You're like an M&M, Bailey.
I am an M&M, the brown one. The brown one's always nice and sultry. She had the boots and everything. Yeah. So Lisa was tough. She was loving, but she was a spitfire and she wouldn't put up with crap. She wouldn't put up no crap. So she's a lot like me.
Mm-hmm.
The Dahms would eventually settle down in Tacoma, Washington. So we are back in the Pacific Northwest for this one.
And can we Northwest is wild.
Yeah, and can we just say how crazy Washington State is, especially King County? King County, like every true crime episode, it's like King County, King County, King County.
I wonder if it's the overcast rainy weather combo.
I don't know. I have no idea.
Maybe there's some like fungi growing there that's making everybody a little cray.
Maybe so. And so it was in Tacoma where Lisa would eventually go on to graduate high school, and then she began to pursue a career in healthcare. After graduating, Lisa became an aide at a nursing home, which is where she met Daniel Dean Carlson.
Okay.
Both Lisa and Daniel were living in Tacoma, Washington at that time, and after dating for a year, they ended up getting married, and this is in 1994.
Okay.
One man who knew Dan since the 6th grade described him as, quote, I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh, as, quote, the quintessential virgin.
Oh.
And said he was a little bit off kilter.
It's a lot of random words put together in one sentence to describe somebody.
Mm-hmm. And his friend described Dan as not being the most talented with relationships. His first and only girlfriend was Lisa, and they ended up getting married.
I mean, that's all right.
Yeah. But he's kind of a weird dude.
I mean, it's okay.
To each his own.
To each their own. Yeah.
He would go on to say that the pairing between Lisa and Dan seemed to be off or weird to a lot of people. And it had to be one of those situations that literally opposites attract. Because Lisa was like pretty and fun and vivacious and outgoing, and Dan was the quote quintessential virgin. Right?
Yeah. It's okay.
But despite this, the two seemed really happy. They had good jobs. They were living down by the Sound, and they were just your normal young couple. They had friends. They did social activities on the weekend, just kind of normal young married life.
Yeah. I'm sure she was helping him be less awkward
and less of a virgin, I'm sure.
Hopefully.
Yeah. But Lisa and Dan soon found out that they were expecting.
Oh, so yes, she was helping him be less of a virgin.
Yes. And Dan's mom, Carol, had urged Dan and Lisa to move closer to them near a town called Graham, Washington, so that they could have some support with the baby, right? They're young. They just got married. They're working. That's a lot with the new baby.
I support that.
Lisa wasn't exactly thrilled about this idea, but reality quickly kicked in, and she realized that she would definitely need the extra support because Lisa was having twins.
Her first pregnancy, and she's having twins.
First one, and she's having twins.
Yay.
Understanding that having family support would be the best interest of not only Dan and Lisa, but the babies, they did decide to make the move. So they were going to move closer to Dan's family.
Okay.
The couple ended up transferring to the Rainier Rehabilitation Center, which is a home for disabled adults. So Dan also worked in the field, and they were both able to get jobs at the same rehabilitation center.
Man, that's fortunate.
Yeah. And maybe somewhat fortunate or not so fortunate, but Dan's parents actually both ended up working there as well.
Oh, they all four were working there? That's a lot of time together.
Yeah.
Like, that's a
lot of time with your in-laws.
With just, an inner circle is getting a little too inner-y.
Mike and Julie, I love you guys. I could probably work with you all day, but that's still a lot. So Dan's dad, Daryl, he worked there as an attendant counselor, and Dan's mom, Carol, worked in housekeeping.
Daryl and Carol and Dan, oh my.
Yeah. But not long after this, Lisa ultimately ended up having to leave the job around 1995 when she gave birth to her twin boys of July that year.
Okay.
I think we've all been in that, situation of like, should we go back to work and put the kids in daycare, or is it cheaper to stay home with the kids and not pay for daycare?
Yes. Oh man, that is I feel like so many times that is 6 one way, half a dozen the other.
Yeah. And so the decision was made for Lisa to become a stay-at-home mom.
Okay.
The twin boys.
Okay.
Which I gotta say, some people are cut out for being stay-at-home moms.
You beat me to it. I was literally thinking, if that is a good situation for you, I love that life for you, but that's not everybody's cup of tea. Not everybody thrives in that environment.
Yeah. I am not the best candidate for stay-at-home momming, but at least I know that about myself. Those are my limitations. So
yeah, I'm a middle of the road. I'm a work part-time, be at home part-time.
Yeah,
I like to keep my options open.
So Lisa ended up staying at home, and now she's taking care of twin boys, newborns, right?
Okay.
And it was clear that although this really was the best situation for them, it was still kind of a bad situation as it started to progress.
As what started to progress? Just their day-to-day life in general?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of sacrifice. There's a lot of changes and a lot of sacrifice kind of all at once that I don't think anybody can ever prepare you for the shift into motherhood, especially when it comes with literally moving locations and then not working outside the home anymore. I mean, that's just a lot. There's a lot going on.
Well, and now they had to clothe, diaper, feed the babies, and now they're only doing it on one budget.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And this began to put a big strain on Lisa and Dan's relationship.
Yeah.
So finances are one of the biggest contributing factors to crumbling relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And that, unfortunately, is what started to happen with Lisa and Dan.
Yeah.
So because they were only living on one income, it was reported that the couple naturally began to amass severe debt, especially credit card debt.
Well, and I feel like in the mid-90s, that really was kind of the beginning of, like, yes, I knew there were charge cards or whatever they used to call them before then, but I feel like the mid-90s, mid to late 90s is when people really were starting to get access to more and more possibilities with credit cards and higher limits. And it was just kind of uncharted territory, and that can create a pretty nasty situation if you don't know how to manage that.
Yeah. And so by late 1997, they've got 2 little boys, almost 2 years old. They've already had to file for bankruptcy and hope to consolidate their debt, and they are barely hanging on. They're drowning financially, and they begin to fight.
Yeah. Yeah.
That same year, in hopes of being able to save some money and get back on their feet financially, Lisa and Dan moved into a trailer home on Dan's parents' property in rural Kaposin.
Okay.
Or Kapowson. I think it's Kaposin.
Sure.
And so their parents had a lot of acres. And then there was this trailer that was several kind of 100 yards from, Mama
Carol and
Papa Daryl.
Mm-hmm.
And so they moved on to the trailer onto that property. And so for the next several years, Lisa, again, would stay at home with the twin boys while Dan worked, and they tried to save up as much money as they could living, on the parents' property.
I wouldn't be opposed to that. I really wouldn't. That wouldn't bother me. But again, that I'm not everybody.
Right. But just 3 years after moving into the trailer on her in-laws' property, on July 18th, 1998, Dan was at work when he received an alarming phone call. His mother, Carol, had called him telling him that the twin boys had mysteriously shown up at her doorstep.
Okay.
And so these are 3-year-olds, right? They were born in 95. So these are 3-year-old little boys.
Yeah.
So Mama Carol said that she repeatedly tried to call Lisa, but Lisa was not answering the phone.
Okay.
And it was unlike Lisa and this whole situation. That's why Mama Carol called, because again, the trailer was several hundred yards from Dan and Lisa's place. So why were the twins unaccompanied at her doorstep?
Right.
Right. So Dan left work, drove home, and found that the door to the trailer was ajar. To him and Lisa's trailer.
That's never a good sign. At most people's house. At my house, I don't know. I leave.
Not if the garage door's shut.
Lucas comes home to all sorts of unopened, or I should say opened,
or unclosed. So when Dan walked in, he saw his wife, Lisa, who was 27 years young at the time, shot to death in their trailer home.
Ooh.
When police arrived, they obviously cordoned off the trailer and began processing the crime scene. Police would go on to say that the crime scene was one of the most bizarre crime scenes they had ever experienced in their time in law enforcement.
Ooh, why?
So first off, the scene was staged, and it was staged to look like a robbery. Okay. The house was in complete disarray, and it had been ransacked, but nothing of importance was taken.
Okay.
TVs, jewelry, things like that. Perhaps the most puzzling thing about the crime scene was the details surrounding Lisa's body. She had been shot 3 times, twice in the head and once to her heart. She had been found in a sexually provocative position.
Oh.
Her pants had been pulled down, her shirt had been pulled all the way up, but then there was a blanket that was laid across her lap, covering her naked female body parts.
Okay.
And the most puzzling aspect, so she had been found laying on the couch with a remote control to a sex toy in her left hand, and there was a porno VHS tape in the TV by the couch where she was laying. Now, at first glance, it looks like Lisa was in the middle of what you could say, she was enjoying herself, or in the middle of an erotic moment, right? There's a porno, she's got a remote control to a sex toy in her hand, and she's laying dead on a couch. Obviously, she must have been caught off guard if she was still in that position when she was killed.
Yeah.
So the initial assumption was that there must have been a home break-in or a robbery to interrupt her in such a way.
I don't buy that.
Because if someone had knocked on the door, then she would have, covered up, gotten up, turned the VHS off, hidden the toy, right? If she wasn't expecting anybody.
Right.
But then it begs the question, was this really accurate? Was this really what she was doing? The most baffling thing was that her 2 toddlers were in the next room when this had likely happened, and then they had wandered out of the house to their grandparents' house, which was 150 yards away.
Yeah, again, I'm no judgment, but I just don't think that, I don't know. I just don't think she'd be doing that in the middle of the day
with her boys up.
Yeah, with her boys up. But I'm like I said, I don't know, but that seems odd to me.
Well, it doesn't seem like it would really set the scene for having a pleasurable moment if you're worried about your 2 3-year-old twin boys walking in on.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm like, I don't know.
And the other thing that puzzled detectives was why Lisa was a target in the first place. She is what, and I'm going to refer to a lot of the sayings in this episode, is really off of Mark Safarik's profiling.
Okay.
Right. So you're going to hear things that sound way too smart that are coming out of my mouth. And that's all probably Mark Safarik, right? Kind of going through the crime scene and whatnot. So he called Lisa what you would refer to as a low profile, a low risk target.
Okay.
She had no history of criminal behaviors, no history of sex work, no history of drug use.
Right.
So she was an unlikely target for a random act of violence.
Right.
But further into their inspection of the crime scene, they found some things that, again, were super bizarre. and made even the crime scene investigators have some major suspicions of what really happened to Lisa.
Okay.
Next to her body, so remember she was found on the couch.
Mm-hmm.
Next to her body, there were 3 .22 caliber shell casings that were found. And it would later be confirmed that she was in fact killed with a .22 caliber semi-automatic firearm.
Okay.
As I said before, the drawers in the master bedroom and bathroom had pulled out, dumped on the floor, but there was no signs of forced entry. None of the Carlson's valuables were missing, right? And we've talked about this a lot in a lot of episodes. And what's even more, when technicians were examining blood splatter on the walls, they started to think that the entire murder scene had been staged. On the back of the couch, there was a hair swipe pattern from Lisa's bloody hair. So it was determined that she likely had been moved from the position where she was shot.
Oh.
Because her hair wouldn't have been soaked in blood. It would have been soaked in blood. And then if they moved her, then that's what would have caused the hair swipe.
Yeah.
There wouldn't have been a hair swipe if she was shot and left in that position.
Correct.
Right?
Right.
And so after, cordoning off the crime scene, taking all of the evidence early on into the investigation, naturally, suspicion fell on Lisa's husband, Daniel Carlson, right? Because that's usually work from the inside out. Friends and family reported a troubled marriage with claims that Daniel was controlling and potentially violent.
Who was claiming this?
Friends and family.
Friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So obviously this perked detectives' ears, so they began to question Dan to figure out his alibi. When talking to police, Dan said on the day of the murder, Lisa had been late picking up the kids, which in turn made him 45 minutes late to work. He mentioned that day that he had been at work by 3 p.m., which meant that he had to leave Kapowson around 2:40 p.m. Now, investigators all considered Dan to be a pretty spineless dude, that he was super vanilla and likely not capable of pulling something like this off. And it reminds me of the Camille Arfman case with Tom Bledsoe, how the police were like, there's no way this dude could do it.
Yeah. Which that's always surprising to me that you, after that many years of police work, not that I don't know how much police work they had under their belt, but I feel like after 7 months of podcasting, it's completely changed how I look at people.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that you still hear cases where it's like, yeah, they didn't even think this dude or this chick could be involved in it.
Yeah. And again, it sounds like when they were asking about his alibi, it seemed to start checking out as far as the time of death when he was at work. And literally everybody that is interviewed around like the law enforcement who dealt with Dan, they were like, yeah, he's kind of like milquetoast.
Sure.
Super vanilla, definitely not capable of pulling this off and for sure not pulling it off himself. And so regardless of that, regardless of him being compared to like a wet piece of milk toast, they felt like his alibi, because they did check into it, he was at work, and they did not think that he had enough time to murder Lisa, stage the crime scene, because the records indicated that he was at work by 3 on the day of her murder. And on top of that, there was literally zero physical evidence tying him to the murder.
I'm just still thinking about how insulting really it is to be referred to as milk toast.
Literally.
Like, is there a worse insult? Like, toast and milk are at least yummy.
Yeah.
Toast is good. Milk is good.
Put together.
Yeah. But I mean, I think Grandma Janie made it for me sometimes.
Yeah, I'm sure. So after the husband was ruled out as a suspect, now on to the boyfriend.
Because, hello. Is his name Richard? What's his name? Alan. Mark.
No. Now, it was here where detectives found out that Lisa actually had a boyfriend, even though she was still married to Dan.
Okay.
So sometime before or during the separation, Lisa began seeing a man by the name of Sean McKillop.
Sean McKillop. They were separated?
I'm getting there.
Oh.
I'm getting all that.
Okay.
Now, what's kind of wild is Sean, Lisa's boyfriend, was actually a really good friend of Dan's. Okay. I'm not sure like how good of a friend, but he was kind of the one who described Dan as being a quintessential virgin. So
not like a
Super
Like good as in like got your back type
BFFs.
good.
Yeah. So her boyfriend Sean was actually the one who drafted up the separation agreement between the two of them. So he was dating Lisa, but was also friends with Dan.
And that is quite the triangle. Did they work together as well?
Oh. He didn't work, remember?
Oh, well, but I mean, like when they,
Oh, no.
I wonder if that's how they met, was all through work.
I don't think so, but I don't actually know if I know that.
Yeah.
So what detectives are finding out? Lisa started dating Sean. Sean actually had drawn up these agreements, these separation agreements, which outlined that Lisa and Dan, and they both had agreed to this, they would continue living together until their bankruptcy case was resolved, but they would sleep in different beds.
Okay.
So they were separated in the same house because they couldn't afford to move out.
Okay.
Lisa would care for the children during the day while Dan worked, and his normal shift was from 2:15 in the afternoon to 10:30 at night.
Okay.
And Lisa would arrive in Kapowson before Dan left for work, watch the kids until he returned around 11 p.m. And then she would normally leave and spend the night at Sean's house.
I mean, like, no offense, but to me, that sounds like most marital living situations, like the first few years of having kids. It's like two ships sailing in the night, tag teaming on the kids. Sleep one of you sleeping on the couch with a kid, the other one's in bed.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times I would end up sleeping, like in a kid's bed or on the couch. And so I'm like, I mean, that doesn't sound
pretty normal.
That sounds actually pretty normal to me.
Yeah. And so Lisa was essentially 1 foot out of the door.
Yeah.
Right. For the time being. So detectives ended up contacting Sean McKillop to inform him of Lisa's death and to, of course, ask questions and ascertain his alibi. Sean was obviously heartbroken about Lisa's death and told investigators that he actually had been with Lisa the night before her murder and told detectives that she actually was planning on leaving Dan the following day, the day that she was killed, and they were going to move to Arizona where Sean had family. Okay. Are you following?
Yeah.
Sean acknowledged that he had last seen Lisa around 12:40 p.m. on the day of the murder. She had been traveling back from staying with him that night and arrived back to her trailer no later than 1:45 p.m. When detectives checked into Sean's alibi during the murder, he also had a strong alibi, so he was removed as a suspect.
Okay.
So now the husband's been removed as a suspect. The boyfriend has been removed as a suspect, and she's a low risk target. So this is just what's baffling everybody.
It's like a who's done it.
But this is also where Sean shared some startling new information with police. Sean apparently, he had told them that he begged Lisa not to tell Dan she was leaving him, fearing his reaction because as of late, Dan had become more and more violent, according to Sean.
Okay.
And just kind of as a fun fact, side fact, that is when people are at the most risk in domestic violence relationship is when they leave. And so if you guys are in a domestically violent relationship, make sure to find counselors, social workers that specialize in this and that can help you develop a safety plan around it, because that's when most people get killed. Is when they leave.
Is when they announce that they're leaving?
Yeah, is when they leave the relationship.
Okay.
Packing up, walking out the door.
Gotcha.
Right? That kind of thing. So just be aware of that. Be vigilant. Be vigilant. So Sean said Dan was becoming more violent. He'd slam things, throw things, apparently had hit Lisa a couple of times. And this was on top of the verbal and emotional abuse.
Which I have to say, that's always so baffling to me that you can have a person who is, if all of this is accurate, if all of this is true, how do you have somebody who's so vanilla, so quote unquote milquetoast, but then so violent behind closed doors? That's, as to this day, I'm still baffled by that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personality.
Well, and to kind of back it up, Sean was like, I even have a recording of this. And so he ended up giving law enforcement a secret recording, and Lisa had actually recorded it months before her murder.
Oh, wow.
And gave it to Sean. And in this recording, Dan admitted to strangling Lisa in a previous assault. And so Sean had told investigators that Lisa had given him the tape and told him that if anything happened to her, he needed to take that recording to the police.
Oh, wow.
Essentially saying that it would be Dan.
Dan is not the man.
Dan's not the man. So again, husband's ruled out, boyfriend's ruled out. Now the only other working from the inside out, there are two other immediate, I don't know if suspects, but persons of interest that they needed to look into.
Carol and Daryl.
So police wanted to get alibis for Daryl and Carol Carlson because they were the other closest people, at least in proximity to Lisa.
Right.
Police learned that 5 months earlier, there was an altercation with Papa Daryl that resulted in a restraining order against him by Lisa.
Oh.
What they found out was that Carol had come banging onto the door of Lisa's trailer, and there was a heated exchange with Mama Carol calling Lisa a, quote, whore and a bitch.
Oh, that's not nice.
After Lisa makes Carol leave, 10, 15 minutes later, another banging at the door. Now Papa Daryl had showed up. When Lisa opened the door, he rushes in, grabbed Lisa by the throat, throws her to the ground. And apparently, Carol and Daryl thought that Lisa and Sean were having sex while the twins were in the trailer. And so they came over to confront Lisa.
Y'all, this does sound like 1996 or whatever. This is Jerry Springer. Like, yeah, this would have been on daytime television.
Well, Sean actually had been there when Papa Daryl had rushed into the trailer and assaulted Lisa.
Oh.
So they ended up calling the police to resolve the issue, and that's when Lisa took out a restraining order.
Golly.
But she didn't press charges. So she did take out a restraining order, but she didn't press charges.
Yeah.
So obviously this was disconcerting for investigators, but as it turns out, Daryl's alibi checks out, right? So when Lisa was murdered, Daryl was at work.
Okay.
He was at work all day, so ultimately he was dismissed as a witness. Now, for Mama Carol, it became clear that there was bad blood between Lisa and Carol.
Mm-hmm.
It was clear that Carol did not like Lisa and did not agree with how she was raising the children.
Oh, okay.
Them fighting words.
Come again?
Say it in my other ear.
Say it to my face.
So when investigators questioned Carol about the day of Lisa's murder, Carol indicated that she was home all day, but did see a light-colored vehicle that was in the driveway the day of the murder.
Of course she did. She's probably peeking out that window. She's watching. So one time, a boyfriend and I broke up. I was like 19. I was living with Grammy, right? I had just moved the worst. Yeah. I had just moved to Texas. And so this boyfriend and I like break up. We're like in the street type of thing. It wasn't anything bad. It was just like we broke up. And I turned around and Grammy is straight up like peeking through the blinds of the dining room. And she sees me and it's just like that stereotypical like, whoop, like close the blinds, go back like, oh, Chelsea. How are you doing? Are you okay? And I was like, I saw you looking at me through the blinds.
Anna.
Love Anna. Oh. So I'm sure she did see a car. I mean, she saw a lot.
She read a burn book too. For those of y'all who don't know, our sweet, frail, wonderful grandmother has this like black book of resentment. Pretty sure. Didn't you say you found it? I'm in there somewhere. I'm sure I'm in there multiple times.
I think you're in there.
You told me I was.
Oh, I've probably blocked that out.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing. So Mama Carol was like, yeah, I've been home all day, but I saw this light colored vehicle that was in the driveway the day of the murder. Carol also claimed that even though she was at home all day, she didn't hear anything outside the ordinary. Okay. I mean, I don't know exactly how loud 22 caliber gunshots are, but 3 gunshots inside a trailer 150 yards away. I mean, is it possible that she didn't hear anything?
Well, I mean, if she had her ear protectors on when she pulled the trigger, she probably didn't hear a whole bunch.
Oh, wowie, wow. She said sometime in the early afternoon, again, Lisa's twin boys had made their way over to her house. That's when she tried to call Lisa multiple times, left multiple messages on Lisa and Dan's answering machine, telling her that the boys had gotten out of the house. She needed to wake up, make Lisa aware that they were down at her house. When asked why she didn't simply go over to check on Lisa, Carol said that she wasn't welcome at their home because of the restraining order.
Well,
Which
I
is
mean, that's fair.
That's valid, right? You could throw a rock though.
Or
would that be violating a restraining order?
I don't know. It depends on the restraining order. What did Kate tell you the other day?
Oh, that's
valid.
Yeah. And so after several hours of not hearing from Lisa, that is when Mama Carol decided to call Dan, which prompted him to leave work and come home to check on Lisa. She could throw a rock, like, to wake her up. Like, I can't get this close to the house, but honk your horn. Like, drive up to, if you have a 20-foot restraining order, go to the 25-foot mark, bring up to your room, knock on the horn. I don't know. Shit. Okay.
I know you're in there.
You better answer your phone, you flew, you hussy. Okay. So investigators are hitting a dead end.
Yeah.
Multiple dead ends. And they continue to investigate Lisa's murder. One of the main goals was to locate the murder weapon because thus far they hadn't been able to find it. At some point early on into the investigation, Dan had actually volunteered to officers that he kept a gun at his mother's house. An officer contacted Carol, asked for the gun, which she produced. It was a 9mm pistol. She willingly allowed the officer to retrieve the weapon, and she also led officers to a .22 caliber Marlin rifle that was in a shed behind her house. Well, it would turn out that this was not the murder weapon. It was inconsistent with the casings found from the crime scene. So they turned over their weapons. It was not a match. Daniel also told police that 7 months before the murder, he had purchased a .22 caliber handgun with his mother, and Carol verified that she had been with Dan when he had bought the gun. However, Dan said that the gun was inoperable, so he took it to a friend who could fix it, and then eventually decided to trade it at a gun show for some 9mm ammunition.
I think that's the gun that I won at that gun show. I think I won Dan's Taurus. It was a POS. Mine was a 9mm. It wasn't a .22 caliber. Well, I won someone's lemon of a gun.
Lemon lock gun.
Lemon lock gun at a gun show.
Yeah. So Dan was like, yeah, I had this .22 caliber handgun, but it sucked. And so I traded it in for some ammo.
I tried killing my wife numerous times with a gun. It never once worked. I traded it in.
And so the investigators were like, that's no problem. Just where's the record of the purchase or the trade? And he was like, I mean, I didn't keep all that. I didn't keep a receipt for, trading my gun for ammo.
I mean, I wouldn't have kept the receipt. My husband would. Lucas would have all the receipts
in his lockbox. That would be the only thing kept in his lockbox. There wouldn't be any like smutty, erotic, weird shit. It would be receipts
and our
Excel spreadsheets printed out, alphabetical,
and some beef jerky.
Just in case. So
crap.
Even again, after following this lead, as far as the .22 caliber handgun, looking at the guns on the, Mama Carol's property, all that, there was no murder weapon that they found. And so by 2001,
that's a handful of years,
the case had stalled. All leads had gone cold. No murder weapon, no eyewitnesses, little forensic evidence pointing to the murderer.
It's cold. That's cold.
Investigators continued to work the case, though, and after several years of no leads, no closer to closing the case, they decided they need some professional help. And that's when local police decided to bring in retired FBI Special Agent Mark Safarik to help them identify other components to this murder that they may have missed. Which I just want to say, it's really kind of surreal and cool reading about this stuff and like, oh, this, FBI agent Mark came in, like, oh, that's so cool. And then we actually talked to him, like, this is the same guy,
I literally was sitting here just thinking about that. I'm like, man, that's so cool that we actually got to talk with Mark.
Yeah. The law enforcement investigators knew that they needed fresh eyes and a skilled expertise of a seasoned profiler, which Mark is and was even at that time.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
After he was contacted, Mark Safarik asked to review their murder books, the collection of 911 calls, crime scene photos, witness interviews, everything.
Okay.
And while reviewing the evidence, there were several things that stood out to Mark.
Okay.
Now, I had to kind of just bullet these out because it was really interesting to try to like piece this case together on like the case before Mark came in, while he was investigating it, and then after, right? And so I'm just going to kind of bullet some things that he would go on to note as being significant for building a profile.
Okay.
Which is, again, really interesting perspectives. Not all of them I thought about. Number one, Lisa and Dan's trailer was very remote. Their house was about 1.5 miles down a lonely stretch of woods. It was really isolated, and it was really hard to find if you didn't know where you were going.
I was going to say, it's not one of those like you lived across the street and could peek out your window and survey this person or this family on a
surveil.
Yeah, that word. That's a word too, I think.
Yeah. So there were dead end and trespassing signs down their roads. He said that you wouldn't even know that there was a house down there unless you knew what you were looking for.
Right.
And this is one of the things that made him believe that Lisa was not a victim of a random attack, like a home invasion or a robbery, which it makes so much sense when I hear that. But as I was going through this, I didn't even think about that until he brought it up, right? Number two, no way the children left the house and walked all the way to the grandparents' house through thick woods on their own. So when Mark Safarik had gotten to the trailer, he walked the path that the boys supposedly walked, right? So he walked from Lisa's trailer to Dan and to Daryl and Carol's trailer. And he was like, it's not a well-beaten path. It's literally through like thicket and bushes.
Right.
And he was like, there's no way that those 3-year-old boys had walked there on their own.
Well, and not if they didn't have a good relationship. Like that would be one thing. If they had a great relationship and they walked this, the woods every day to grandma and grandpa's house type of thing. But yeah.
And the other thing is that neither one of the boys had any blood transfers on them, indicating that they likely had not been home when Lisa was murdered, which was Carol's version of events.
Right.
Because Mark, his perspective was, if these boys are at home, even though that they're 3, if they see mom on the couch, they're going to walk over to her to try to wake her up or talk to her or something. And there was a lot of blood on the crime scene, and they should have had some sort of blood on them.
Right.
Number 3, and I'm going to circle back to this. So the keys to the trailer from when somebody came in to look, they were on the counter, not by the couch.
Okay. And they kept them by the couch.
I don't know if I see this one, because this will give it away if I say more into this. So I'll circle back to that. Number 4, when Mark Safarik reviewed the 911 call, so Dan was actually the one who called 911, right? Because Dan was the one who found Lisa.
Right. Because Carol called Dan, supposedly Carol called Dan saying, the boys showed up at the house. Lisa's not answering my phone call. I can't go over there because of the restraining order. What, you need to figure this out.
Yeah.
You need to do something about this.
Okay. And so when Dan got home, he found her. That's when he called 911. And Mark Safarik, his perspective was that the 911 call was very odd, that it was void of emotion and it sounded rehearsed.
Okay.
Which,
I mean, but
I'm always on the fence of that stuff.
I know. Right? I was like, but if the guy is kind of a weird dude and he's, I don't know.
Number 5, one of the biggest things that Mark Safarik noticed was that the crime scene had been staged. He said, quote, there was a very strong attempt to humiliate Lisa, humiliate her in death, humiliate her as a person, humiliate her as a mother. And he believes that Lisa's killer knew her intimately based off of that information.
Okay.
Number 6, the remote for the VCR is on the coffee table, which is quite a distance from the position on the couch. Right? So if she's in the middle of watching this porn video on VHS, then you probably want to have the remote close to you, or by you, or on you, or whatever.
Right.
Number 7, ballistics tests determined that Lisa was in fact not lying down when she was shot. She was actually sitting upright, and it wasn't straight at her. It was from someone from up above, and it's someone she knows, according to Mark, and that she's not worried about her safety.
Okay.
So the theory is that she was sitting on the couch
Okay.
and the killer shot at a standing next to her angle.
Mm-hmm.
And so that insinuates that Lisa knew who this person was and there was no threat of who they were.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Number 8, kind of going back to what Mark was saying about humiliation, he said that there was sexual staging. So that's what you were talking about earlier with the staging.
Mm-hmm.
He said there was sexual staging to make it look like an autoerotic staging. And according to him, this was indicative of ritualized behavior. So essentially behavior that wasn't necessary to commit the crime.
Okay.
It was behavior that the killer did for their own
right.
purposes, gratifications,
Right.
agendas, whatever. It's need driven. And again, in his opinion, it was only there to humiliate Lisa and it didn't serve a purpose other than that.
Okay. Yeah. And I can see that.
Yeah. Number 9, odd and curious twist in the staging regarding the blanket covering up Lisa's body. So Mark thinks that it suggests that this evidence suggests that the body means something to the perpetrator, and the perpetrator didn't want law enforcement to come across this person in a shameful way. So even though she was posed in a sexually graphic nature, her decency was covered up, or her indecency was covered up,
Right.
with a blanket.
Yeah.
And so he was like, if you're going to humiliate her, then why put a blanket to cover her up when people first see her?
Right.
It doesn't make any sense.
To me, it's almost, I don't know. I guess we'll find out. But to me, it almost seems like I'm mad. I'll show you. And then it was like, well, I don't know. I feel kind of bad. Maybe let's at least cover up part of her.
Yeah.
Like that. Like, it seems like there's some conflict or tension in that.
Like the first part is wanting to humiliate and shame her. And then the cover up is to minimize the shame.
Right.
So either this person acted impulsively and regretted it,
Right.
or there were more people involved.
True. Yeah.
Right?
That's a good point.
And lastly, the conflicting evidence from family members regarding the day of Lisa's murder. Lisa's mother had told investigators that she had called and left a voicemail on their messaging machine, but when investigators checked her voice machine device, there were only messages from Carol. So when Mark came in, he noticed that Lisa's mother is saying that she left a message that day, but the evidence from the voice machine was only Carol's voice messages.
Like, where is that message?
And so that's when Mark, being the goat that he is, he was like, y'all at Pierce County Sheriff's Department, y'all need to send this answering machine to the FBI's crime lab for analysis. So this was short and sweet. Kind of when he came in, these were the first things that he's noticing from all of the data from the crime.
Right.
And so after all of this stuff, a search warrant was then quickly created and executed at Carol and Daryl Carlson's house, because by this point, Dan and the boys had moved in with Daryl and Carol, which makes sense.
Yeah.
And the search warrant included any documents that could indicate the planning of Lisa's murder. While executing the search warrant, investigators found some journals. Apparently, the Carlsons would keep a daily, Lavanna, the Carlsons would keep a daily journal of Lisa's shortcomings as a parent, and were going to use that as ammunition during the divorce. So they were literally keeping journals on what Lisa did and did not do all day, every day. The Carlsons' answering machine was confiscated by police because Mark Safarik said, y'all need to send all this stuff in. It was confiscated by police, sent to the FBI. And the FBI lab actually ended up determining that the message that Lisa's mother had left on the tape had been erased, and that the message that Carol left had been recorded on top.
Oh, man, I'm always like, how do they know this stuff? Like, it's so cool to me that people know how to do this stuff. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. So with this information, with Mama Carol not really having a solid alibi,
right,
along with Mark Safarik's analysis of the perpetrator's behavior and the crime scene, the district attorney decided that it was enough to arrest Carol and Daniel Carlson, so mama and son. So Carol and Dan were arrested on December 20th, 2001, while at work at the Rainier Rehabilitation Center. You know how embarrassing that would be to get arrested at work?
No, I do not know how
I'm sure it would be really embarrassing.
I'm sure
I would be mortified. Carol and Dan were charged with first-degree murder as both principals and accomplices and would be tried jointly. So both of them were the murderer and accomplices and would be tried at the same time.
I guess I'm still trying to figure out how they had enough evidence to arrest them. Is it
I
just
think I'm going to cover some of that.
Okay, continue.
But I think the combination of
Lack of alibi for
Carol, Dan might have had enough time if he had help. Like he might not have had time to kill and stage, but he might have had time to do one or the other. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And then, so that 22 caliber handgun that he supposedly traded for ammo,
right?
All the journals, and there's a lot more, and I'm going to bring it out at this point.
Okay.
Ready
for that next wave.
So during their trial, the prosecution argued that Carol and Dan had the means, motive, and of course, opportunity. They argued that the motive was a custody issue. The evidence suggested that Lisa was contemplating a permanent separation and divorce from Dan, as we talked about. And 3 months before the murder, she had told her father, Frank Dahm, that she was planning to divorce Dan after the bankruptcy proceeding was resolved.
Right.
And when was it going to be finalized, the bankruptcy proceeding? If you had to guess.
I don't know.
It was finalized 3 days after her murder.
Oh, crap. Yeah, that's convenient.
Additionally, 3 days before the murder, Lisa told Sean's stepsister, Lisa Day, that she wanted out of the marriage and wanted to go to Arizona, where Sean's father lived, and she wanted to take her children with them.
Yeah, see, when you were like, and they were going to move to Arizona, I was like, is she going to take the kid? Like, and of course, in my mind, it's like, is she going to take the kids? How's that going to go? How's that going to work?
And so, according to prosecutors, Carol and Dan decided the only way to resolve this was for Lisa to die because they were afraid that Lisa was going to leave Daniel and take the sons with her. Carol shared her concern about losing the children more vividly, telling a coworker that there was, quote, no way that bitch was ever going to take my grandchildren away.
All right, Carol,
Carol's a little rough around the edges. And so during the 2-month trial, the jury ended up hearing all of the dirty details of the Carlson family dysfunction.
And now you say that they're enmeshed.
Oh, I literally have a whole organized paragraph outline of enmeshment that I want to get to.
Oh, do you really?
I really do.
Oh, I'm so excited.
It seemed that Dan was the epitome of what you think of a mama's boy. Barf. Can I just say, y'all try not to take this personally, but all you mamas out there with little boys, if y'all refer to your sons as like, my sweet baby boy angel, my sweet, I can't.
I hate when mothers refer to their son as son. That's such a pet peeve of mine. When they're like, son, come here, son. I don't know what it is about that.
Listen,
I can't.
It's no hate. I understand everybody does stuff differently, but the reason I dislike it so much is because it's highly correlated with enmeshment, and it's real weird. So it was reported that Carol Carlson was somewhat of a helicopter mom and was considered a really overbearing person, especially when it came to her sweet, precious baby boy.
Her Daniel Dean, what was his name?
No. She was the leader of the family and definitely wore the pants in the relationship.
All right.
It was said that she ruled over the family with an iron fist, and it seemed that Dan had no backbone when it came to his mom and would do anything and everything for his mom. Now, I think we can all imagine how difficult this was for Lisa. It seemed that Dan and his mother's relationship was kind of weird, like unnaturally close. Closer than a typical mother-son relationship.
Yeah.
He relied on his mother to make all of his decisions, even as like a grown-ass man. He would eat all of his meals at his mama's house, and she would pack him lunches for work.
I literally was about to ask, did she pack him lunches?
She literally packed him lunches, and I bet you she cut his fucking crust off his bread too.
I bet she wrote a little note on the napkin, like, Love you so much.
She's such a sweet angel baby boy.
Mama loves you. XOXO.
Yeah, so she packed him lunches, and Mama Carol was super intrusive, and it was really weird for Lisa. On one occasion, Lisa had gotten out of the shower, and Carol was just standing in her house. And Lisa was like, "What are you doing in my house?" And Carol was like, "This is my son's house, and I can come and go as I please."
Okay. All right.
You hate this so much. So Carol just never seemed satisfied with Lisa in any fashion, and just your typical, she's just not good enough for my son. Okay.
I hate it. I hate it so much.
Like, I have to go rogue for a second and literally do an education around enmeshment, because I hate enmeshment so much that I would be doing this community a disservice if I did not educate, especially you enmeshed mothers out there.
It's enabling, number one, enmeshment, number two.
I don't know. Enmeshment might be
tied for first.
Because I think you can accidentally like enable people and it not be, like the worst, but enmeshment, it's a whole. So one of the things that I say is like, it's the redheaded stepchild of trauma, right? You've got abandonment, you've got neglect, you've got abuse, and then you've got enmeshment, and nobody really talks about it enough. And so enmeshment is a dynamic found in family relationships where there is obviously a lack of boundaries, and parents are typically overly and inappropriately reliant on their children for support. Emotional support, maybe physical support, psychological support. And the children are not allowed to become emotionally independent or separate from their parents, usually without guilt trips.
Right.
I'm sure those of y'all who are listening right now, if you're having a visceral reaction to hearing about this, then you're probably familiar with that enmeshed dynamic, even if you didn't have the understanding or words for it. Those who find themselves in enmeshed family systems, dependency is built on obligation to the person or family system, and loyalty is driven by guilt.
Okay.
And there's likely too much closeness.
A lot of closeness.
So, for example, in Lisa's case, it was reported that Lisa would keep the curtains drawn at home because she knew that Carol was looking through the windows.
I told you that Carol was looking through the windows.
And how inappropriate is it, a mother looking through her grown-ass son's house with his wife and kids, like looking through their windows, making sure my baby boy's okay? I can't. So obviously this woman had an issue with boundaries, and even in severe forms of enmeshment, there's what we call emotional incest. People really don't like when I use those words because it grosses people out, but it's true. It's essentially when a parent relies on the child or the children for emotional fulfillment that a partner or spouse should really be providing. And the partners then feel like they are second fiddle to the parent.
Say that one more time.
So like,
oh, I see what you're saying. So Lisa felt second fiddle to Carol.
Yeah, because Mama Carol is essentially like a spouse. She's cooking him food. She's making him lunches. She's dictating his financial decisions, where he should move, what he should, basically what a partner should do.
Right.
Lisa doesn't have a say in that because she feels second fiddle.
Yeah. Because Carol's already
got that locked down.
Penciled that in.
Yeah. So it's super icky, and it's super icky to outsiders of the family. Usually if you're in it, you don't realize it until you get some space, or your new husband or wife is like, that's fucking weird.
You're right.
And you're just like, no, it's totally normal that my mom still does my laundry and, draws my bubble baths for me at 35. You know what I mean?
Mr. Bubbles.
Oh. So I'm going to put links in the show notes for enmeshment if you guys want to read up more on that, because you really need to figure that out.
Dr. Hart's going to be so excited. Yes, she's like, when are y'all going to talk more about enmeshment?
Oh, that's a whole thing. Okay. So this was all revealed during the trial, okay, that there was this super envious mom who felt like her son was, with this hussy who didn't deserve her little boy and all that weird stuff. And it was also reported that Carol was basically, she viewed her grandsons as like her own children. So she was not going to have her boys taken away from her. So needless to say, the whole relationship with Mama Carol made Lisa real weird. And I'm sure that they knew something was icky or wrong. But again, at this time, without social media, seminars, blah, 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 Lisa didn't have the words to say what was going on. She just knew she was trapped and she needed a way out.
I was going to say, and Lisa didn't have a way out either. I mean, she was financially, they have no freedom. Literally, they are living on the same property as these people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a mess. That's a mess.
So another reason why Lisa and Dan's relationship was failing is because obviously he wouldn't take up for Lisa.
Right.
And anytime that Lisa and Carol would talk, they would argue because Mama Carol was like, you're not raising the kids right. They need to be wearing this. Y'all need to be doing this with your money. And Lisa's like, bitch, can you stay out of our life for a little bit? Right. So now we're going to transition. So we have the enmeshment, right? We talked a little bit about that. That's become aware. People have become aware of that throughout the trial process. And now we're going to transition into Mark Safarik's perspective that he provided to law enforcement during the investigation. Okay. So kind of part of his testimony. So Mark Safarik spoke to the evidence from his perspective as a profiler. One of the things that Mark ended up sharing regarding the defendants was the peculiar and dysfunctional relationship Dan had with his mom, like we talked about. He noted that Dan had an over-reliance on his mom and that she was super controlling of the dynamic. Okay. Mark questioned if Dan, who was this mild-mannered guy, could be the one behind the murder. So this is help answering your question of like why both of them were arrested and how Mark's profiling contributed to that. He kind of went on to say like this idea that this timid guy shot his wife, posed her body, staged the crime scene just did not fit the bill according to Mark's experience, that Dan couldn't have been the mastermind behind all of that. Okay. So it suggested that this was likely a two-person scenario with Dan and his mother, Carol. Okay. Though he wasn't sure who exactly did the shooting, he does believe that one of them was the shooter and the other was the accomplice. He noted that near the time of the murder, Lisa was contemplating divorce, which was that motive. And Lisa had told Dan that she couldn't do this anymore. She was moving out, taking the boys with her. Yeah. And he was noting that Carol would not stand for this. She couldn't stand giving up her babies. And even went as far as not even acknowledging that Lisa was the mother of the children. Oh, all right. Mark theorized that the mother and son teamed up to kill Lisa. Carol was home. Daniel was not. They fit his profile in a dysfunctional relationship. Mark added that he believes Carol was the mastermind and Daniel was the puppet. Daniel had always been subjugated to Carol since he was a little boy. Right. It's the reason Dan didn't interfere with Carol acting like a crazy asshole, right? And acting like her grandchildren were her own kids. Right. So during the trial, Mark has to explain, like he's trying to explain this from a criminal profiling perspective. And he had to explain other aspects of the staging. Mark spoke to the pornographic VHS tape, explaining the bizarre component to the jury. He noted that the VHS tape was in the middle of the tape. And he said, if Lisa had actually watched it, it would have gone to the end and rewound. Oh, that's a good point. But when they found her body, it was in the middle. And again, the remote was nowhere close to her. Right. And that I'm assuming was paused. Yeah. It was just in the middle. Again, he spoke to the staging of the crime scene. In his opinion, it was to humiliate Lisa. Mark believed that Carol was the one to stage Lisa on the couch. And then likely when Dan came home, he saw the shameful nature of Lisa laying on the couch and then covered her up with a blanket to try to minimize the shameful component. Obviously, Mark's expertise and testimony was a huge component to helping the jury see through the bizarre puzzle pieces of the crime scene and Lisa's murder. Right. And I don't know if I bring this up here, but going back to the keys, remember how it was a little confusing? So one of the other things that Mark said in his breakdown in his profile is that it was weird that the keys were on the kitchen counter and not next to the couch. Okay. Because his perspective was, if you walk in and you see Lisa laying there, you walk straight over to her instead of going to the kitchen, putting your keys there, and then checking on the body. Right. Yeah. You know what I mean? Right. And so to tie up the trial against Carol and Dan, the state alleged that on July 18th, 1998, Sometime between 1:15 and 2:40 p.m. in the afternoon, Daniel and Carol shot Lisa 3 times with a .22 caliber gun, killing her. Daniel then went to work in an effort to establish an alibi. Carol, in the meantime, staged the murder scene to deflect suspicion and also the attempt to create her own alibi by leaving the voice message on Lisa and Daniel's answering machine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because in the answering machine, she's like, the kids wandered up here, and she called during the times to try to establish the alibi, but they found that those were actually recorded over.
Mm-hmm. God, I wonder how long, how many days, how many months Carol was just sitting there thinking about how she was going to make this happen.
I don't know.
You know what I mean? Like, that had to have taken some time to like piece that whole thing together.
Mm-hmm.
And like how mad she was at that husband. And she probably was like, I bet she's at home watching porn instead of taking care of my grandsons. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I bet she had a whole narrative going.
Yeah. And so with all of the evidence, after a 2-month-long trial in February of 2003, Carol and Dan Carlson were found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 37 years in prison. However, the legal battle wasn't over. In May of 2006, an appeals court overturned the Carlsons' convictions due to evidence that had apparently been obtained illegally, and parts of the testimony against them included hearsay. I don't know all of the details around it.
Right.
Carol's journals were eventually ruled inadmissible, so prosecutors had no other choice but to make a plea deal. Rather than take their chances with another trial, Daniel ended up pleading guilty to second-degree murder, and Carol pled guilty to 3 counts of second-degree assault, 1 count of sexually violating human remains. Daniel at that time was given a reduced sentence of 23 years, and Carol was sentenced to 9 years in prison, but was given time served plus 6 months. The judge at the retrial lashed out at Carol during the sentencing, stating that if it was in his power, he'd give her 200 years and then some. Mm-hmm. So the judge was like, I'm not buying it, but his hands were tied.
Right.
And so in 2008, Carol Carlson was released from prison. She had to register as a sex offender. She was barred from staying with her husband in a trailer park where he had moved to. So she ended up living with her daughter. And then Lisa's children live with Carol and Carol's daughter. One child ended up leaving to go live with Lisa's parents, but one of the boys ended up staying with them. Carol and Dan still maintain their innocence. And the big question is, because even though these 2 individuals were convicted, nobody really knows who actually killed Lisa, like who pulled the trigger. Carol had this sense of malice and rage. She was an organizer, instigator. She was in control, but we don't really know who killed Lisa Carlson.
So neither of them ever confessed?
Nope.
But they did take the plea deals as far as like, sure,
I guess because of the evidence that was against them, or I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
And so all thanks to Mark Safarik, the FBI profiler, he was the one who came in and gave his profile, gave his breakdown. It gave law enforcement what they needed to hone in on the correct individuals, because I don't know if it would have ever been solved if they hadn't brought in a profiler to look at all of these pieces that they may have missed.
Yeah. Golly. Ugh. That just...
Because I don't think it's every day that you walk in and you're like, oh, this for sure was a mother-son tag team. You know what I mean?
Wonder how often you get mother-son tag team.
Well, if they're enmeshed, then probably more often than not.
But I mean, like, as far as actual murders go, you know, like, that can't be super common. There's no way. I can't believe it. I won't believe it.
I think any mother, any parent who covers up for their children's, like if their children did something really bad, like kill another person or do something awful, they're probably enabling enmeshment people.
And you just don't like them.
I just don't like it.
Burns your biscuits.
Burns my biscuits. I would tell parents who, you know, I'd work with their kids in rehab, and they'd call me, my son got arrested for drinking and driving. What do I do? I'm like, what do you mean? What do? You let his ass sit in jail?
Yeah.
Well, I can't let him sit in there. Well, he can't overdose of, fentanyl overdose if he's in jail.
Yeah.
Well, I can't do that. Why? He needs to sit in jail. He needs to be familiar with what that's going to feel like if he doesn't get his shit together.
Yeah.
But they bail him out. They bail him out. They give him money. They give him money. They just can't. And it really bothers me. And I understand that there's, there's a fine line between your kids work hard and, they bought some extra shoes this month and they didn't budget. And so they're asking you for $50 for groceries. It's like, okay.
Sure.
But I'm talking about repeated offenders, with significant things,
Meaning you're always billing them out. You're always having to cover their tracks. You're always having to make excuses, like that sort of thing.
It's that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just say no. And it's hard. I really do understand it's very difficult, but at some point, y'all need to let them sit in jail. They're going to be safer in jail than they are driving drunk.
Or let them launch, man. Let them go. You had your time in the sun. It's all right. Just let them live their life. Let them, as far as the enmeshment, I've kind of switched gears more over to the enmeshment side. It's okay. They can love you and their partner, it's okay.
It makes me so mad.
I know.
It's just and I hear it all the time, especially from my boomer age clients who are like, yeah, I was told at 12 that I was the man of the house. Because, my dad was in the military or he was a traveling salesman. And so I was the man of the house. I'm like, but you weren't. You were a 12-year-old boy.
Right.
You how can you be expected to be? And I understand the language is different. The times are different, but
right.
But that's the unknowing consequence of enmeshment. And so these moms, and this is the stereotypical dynamic of this, since we're going off this case with a mother-son, enmeshment can absolutely be father-son, mother-daughter. It can be a whole range. But, these moms who they rely on their sons for the emotional, the kids are comforting the parents, the kids are making sure they're okay. No, that's not your job.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have any indication that your mom's lonely.
Yeah.
I mean, you can worry about your mom, but you shouldn't feel that it's your responsibility to take care of that person. That's not your job as her son.
Sure.
So, I mean, listen, I could go on the soapbox all day and I don't think we're not going to have any listeners by the end of it.
Or we'll have a whole bunch and they're like, finally somebody put into words.
My husband's mom. Yes, it is. And if you guys need some really good resources, Dr. Kent Adams, and again, I'll list his stuff. He is the guru of enmeshment. He even does enmeshment workshops. I think he's up in Michigan.
Nice.
And he's kind of the best in the field. So I'm going to list all of his resources, and you can identify if you're an enmeshed daughter or an enmeshed son, or if you're from an enmeshed family.
Yeah.
And what are some of the
signs and symptoms,
and how it affects you, and how it creates issues in relationships. You're afraid of commitment. You get weird with so it creates a whole bunch of problems that you don't even realize are there.
Well, and like you said, I think even just having words where it's I can put a word to this. Sometimes that has some healing effects and it can bring to light some things that can then be worked on, resolved, or at least worked around, Yeah. I think it alleviates a little bit of the frustration of I can't quite put my finger on it. Once you have something that you're oh, I think this is what this is.
Yeah.
It just gives you a sense almost of closure type of thing, right?
Yeah, for sure. And so you guys remember that amazing human that we talked about so much in this episode, Mark Safarik? We're interviewing him, and that interview will drop on Friday.
Yeah.
He is awesome. He's just I almost cried when I interviewed with him because I have a professional crush on him.
Yeah.
And I'm also going to link the TV episode of this case.
Yes.
Because they interview him in it. And so you can watch it as well.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So that's the case.
Man. Well, that was definitely an interesting one. And yes, thank you, Mark. Thank you for all you have done and all that you are continuing to do, even after retiring.
He's the best.
It's just amazing to me.
If I could turn him into a Polly Pocket and keep him with me everywhere, I would, and not make it weird.
Right.
So I would absolutely love that.
Work on that.
All right.
Maybe it's enmeshment. I was going to say, are you enmeshed with Mark?
Little Mark.
I know. So, and he's a good dude.
The best. All right, you guys. Well, thanks for hanging out with us for this super wild and crazy ride.
And we'll catch you on the flip side.
Bye, guys.
Later, Gators. Hey, Wildside Tribe. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Wildside Podcast.
Make sure to tune in on Wildside Wednesdays. New episodes will drop each Wednesday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
We would love to hear from you, so if you have a wild case recommendation, email us at wildsidepodcast@gmail.com. That's wildside with a C. Or share your thoughts in the comments below.
As always, if you haven't heard it today, you're loved, you're worthy, and you're valuable. And we'll catch you on
The flip side.